Okay, good morning on this lovely Sunday. Hope you have your handout. We will take a look at it in just a moment, but let's open with the word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you are our Father, that you are our God, that you are so gracious and kind and loving. We thank you for the matchlessness of yourself. We thank you how all of your great and wonderful attributes just shine forth and meet needs on a daily basis. We thank you we live in this country where we have the privilege of gathering like this to even worship you. We thank you, of course, that you've given us the Word of God so that we have an authoritative love letter from heaven, that we can know with surety what you know and what you believe and what you want us to know and believe and live. And we ask for specific help every day as we allow the Holy Spirit to live within us and to make us more into the image of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for the KBC family. We know some are going through deep waters. We ask that you will strengthen and encourage them and help them and cause them to just trust in you more than ever and know that you indeed know the situation and you're able to work exceedingly abundantly above all we could even imagine. And so we're trusting you to do great things, but help us as a KBC family to, humanly speaking, do what we can to seek to be a blessing to others. We need your help this hour, and we ask for your special provision in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen. Okay, today we continue this interesting study in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. Yes, sir. Am I convinced the flood created the canyon since we were down visiting Grand Canyon and others? There are a lot of big holes in America with a lot of beauty to them. So you've got to explain it some way. Everybody starts with the same evidence, and most other explanations sound pretty stupid. That's right. So if you'll be turning in your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 9 is where we will start in a second. We are trying to pull a thread through 1st and 2nd Kings, and we're noting in these two books, which cover hundreds of years, and they cover the time of Israel's history, the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom. And as we are studying them, we're trying to notice how God prophesies things or God says things, and then how they are actually fulfilled even before the books end. And it's an amazing study indeed as we see how God is at work. And so we might say when God speaks, you might as well take it to the bank because he's not known for having a loose tongue to just say things and then later figure out he can't pull them off. So when God says something, he's going to do it. Sometimes it might be a day or days before it's fulfilled. Other times, as we've seen and will see, it might be weeks, months, decades, maybe even centuries. But, as we say, God is never a day late nor a dollar short, so you can count on him. You can trust him, and you will never be disappointed. So last Sunday, we examined a great promise to King Solomon when he asked for wisdom, because he said, I need to make right decisions, and I am a young person, and I need a lot of help. And of course, God said, you betcha, I will gladly give you wisdom, but I will also give you even more. I'll give you riches and honor, etc. So we might say God not only answered his prayer in incredible ways, but God gave him a couple of extra layers of frosting on top of it. So I like that because I not only like dessert, I like multiple layers of frosting on the top. So when God said he would bless, he really did bless. Now, if you will, having been at that high point last week in the life of Solomon, today we go down in the valley in the sense that today we're going to look at the flip side of the coin as God deals with Solomon. And that is God is prophesying judgment if he disobeys. Okay? So 1 Kings 9, 1-9 is where we start. Let me read there some verses so we get this background. 1 Kings chapter 9. Came to pass when Solomon had finished the building of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he was pleased to do, the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time as he had appeared unto him at Gibeon. And the Lord said, I've heard thy prayer, thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built to put my name there forever, and my eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. If thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. If ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, everyone that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and they shall say, why hath the Lord done thus unto this land and to this house? And they shall answer, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them and served them. Therefore hath the Lord brought upon them all this evil. Wow, what a powerful paragraph with an awful lot of stuff in it. So, 1 Kings 8, the chapter that just preceded this, pretty profound, right? We read 1 Kings 9 preceding chapter 8. Okay, good. We know our math. 1 Kings 8 is one of the great prayers of the Bible. That's when Solomon gives his dedicatory prayer. When he dedicated the temple, it took him, 7.5 years to build, and he dedicated it to the Lord, etc. And that is worthy of many weeks of study, just that prayer. But it appears now that several years have passed since then, and I won't go into detail on the chronology why that would seem to be the case. But as we read, the Lord appeared to him a second time. Remember, the first time God appeared to him was at Gibeon back in chapter 3. That's when he had just taken over the kingdom, etc. And in those days there was no temple, so he was at the place where the tabernacle, the tent from the wilderness days, was set up, in the altar, etc. And that's when God appeared to him, and we had the whole wisdom thing. But now when the Lord appeared the second time, he said, I have set apart or sanctified this temple that you have built, and it will be a place where I will be honored, just like I promised David in the covenant. And you can go back to 2 Samuel chapter 7, where God told David, you will not build the temple because you are a man of war, but your son will build this matchless place where I will, as we would say today, it will be the place of my localized presence. Now, granted, God cannot be boxed in, okay? God cannot be housed in any one facility per se. But God was saying, that's the place where I'm going to call home on this earth. This is the place where I will especially magnify myself. But notice the quote now that I put on your sheet, and we'll come to the timelines at the top as we go through the lesson. But notice about 3 lines down in the printed text, the temporal portion of the covenant, the part about Solomon and his descendants, however, is dependent on obedience. So that's why God is so strongly exhorting Solomon here with the necessity to walk as David did, as he said, with integrity, with uprightness, with obedience and everything. And if Solomon would continue walking with God like that, God would indeed put his sons on the throne to rule Israel. But, as God said, if you turn away, Solomon, from following me, and you disobey me and serve other gods, I will cut off Israel from the land. Now, as we're going to see, this is amazing. This is a prophecy about when they are going to be taken out of the land hundreds of years later. So this is starting all the way back with Solomon already. We usually don't think of it like that. We usually think of it later as the kingdoms have divided. But God says, I will cut Israel off from the land. And he says, this very temple, the place of my localized presence, which is so glorious, is going to be robbed, it's going to be desecrated, etc., by pagans. That's hard to believe. The very place God calls home, he would allow foreign, pagan, unbelieving, ungodly people to come and desecrate. But he said, I will let them do it so that anybody who comes by and looks at that remains, they won't just take pictures and say, oh, what a great place. Let's get a selfie in front of the destroyed temple. He said, they will mock and say, what in the world could have ever happened that the place of God's localized presence would be in such shambles? And they're going to say it's because these people who were God's special people violated the covenant. They didn't obey him. Disobedience. So look at the very top chart there, if you will, where we have these 8 categories as we walk through these things. Notice about 4 in from the left. So the issue at stake here with this prophetic reference in 1 Kings 9, 1-9, the whole issue at stake is obedience. Don't turn away from what God has revealed. Don't go after other gods and worship them. And if you do, you will go into exile. Okay? So that's the issue we are talking about right now. Now, before we finish this whole thread, that first going across 1 Kings 9, let's drop down to 1 Kings chapter 11, which is the second one down that you see there, 1 Kings 11, 9-13, etc. And let's start playing this one out because if you haven't noticed already, a lot of these prophecies and fulfillments are intertwined, where, if you will, naturally a prophecy begins and then God introduces another prophecy and then maybe a third prophecy that's tied in with the first prophecy he gave, etc. So in 11:9 following, we are now getting closer to the end of Solomon's life and the last week. Last week we noticed this enigma about him. But let's notice 11:9 following. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. And God had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods. But he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and will give it to thy servant. Whoa. There ought to be a lot of question marks in our mind, a lot of stuff swirling there. God promised David this eternal covenant where there would always be one of his descendants on the throne. And now it sounds like God has changed his mind in these intervening years. So what in the world is going on here? Well, this is toward the end of his life now, okay? Way back here was when we looked at the wisdom part last week, and we saw how all through his life God had blessed him with wisdom, etc. Okay? But now we come toward the end of his life, about 931, and we begin to realize that, wait a minute, there is something wrong here. Since this paragraph says God is very angry with him, and God now seems to be, in effect, reneging on what he has said he's going to do, what's going on? Well, if we go back to the earlier part of chapter 11, this is the enigma we talked about last week. How could somebody who was so wise, who was blessed by God with so much, how in the world, if you will, could he just fall off the cliff by the time he gets to the end of his life? And these verses tell us it's because he did the very thing God told him you must not do. You must not disobey me. You must not follow other gods. You must not turn away from the commandments I give, because if you do, that's when judgment is going to come. And so, for example, in chapter 11 and verse 1, we read how King Solomon loved many strange women. That's King James' term. It's actually foreign women, okay? I'm sure some of them were pretty strange when you have 1,000 wives and concubines, but that's not the point. It's the word foreign. He loved many, pardon? Matter of perspective, huh? Okay. He loved many foreign women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. Okay, you need to help me here. My mind is failing me in old age. Where would we put those on the map? Where was all over the map? Come on, that's too cheap. You're a teacher. You don't take an answer like that. Where would Egypt be? Okay, Egypt is down here. What else do we have? Edomites. Okay, where's Moab? Southeast of what? South and east? Okay, why don't we say there? Good. I knew that's where you meant, yeah. Okay, what else? Ammonites. Where are the Ammonites? Pardon? No, I'm asking you the question, Phil. I'm not asking you the question. That's what you wanted, right? Ammonites over here. What about Edomites? Edomites, okay. We also have Zidonians. Zidon, where's Zidon? Okay, big Z, Zidonites. Hittites, where in the world are the Hittites? Turkey, you're right. Yeah, way up here, Hittites, okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we got them all, okay. So yes, you can see Solomon had wives from all of these surrounding kingdoms, okay. Now, continuing in chapter 11, verses 5 to 7, it even mentions the names of 3 of the foreign deities. You have Ashtaroth, the special goddess of the Zidonians. You have Milcom or Molech, actually the same deity. And then you have Chemosh, okay? And as it says there, Solomon actually built a worship center for each of these foreign wives. So, I mean, if one of them said, well, honey, this is who I worship, he said, go for it. We've got the retirement funds here. Let's build a special worship center for her, for your goddess or your god. Another one said, hey, I'm jealous. You've got to do the same. Well, go ahead, honey. Build your own worship temple over there for that one. And as this passage said, from 11:1 to up to where I read, it simply reminds us that this simply led him into idolatry. All these foreign wives led him into idolatry. Now, what is the issue at stake? Okay, let's go back to our chart. This would be the second one down to the right of the 1 Kings 11, 9 to 13 thing. And the issue at stake here is God says, I will remove the kingdom in the days of your son. In other words, I'm going to tear the kingdom from you, Solomon, and I am going to give it to someone else, but it will not happen in your days. Now, the next 2 statements are incredible. God said, it will not happen in your days because I have such respect for David, your father, that I will give one of the tribes to a descendant of you. I'm not going to wipe out the Davidic line. So here we see how God is going to keep his promise. It's going to narrow it somewhat, but God is going to keep his promise. And he said, because I have such respect for David, and I promised David there would always be one of his descendants on the line, or in line, I'm not going to completely wipe away your family. And number 2, he said, because of this great respect for David, he would still honor everything he'd said about the temple. Didn't mean that it couldn't be destroyed, but it would still be God's localized presence. God didn't say, well, I'm out of here. I'm going to move 150 miles northwest of here or northeast of here or whatever. Okay? So, wow, stop and think of it. How God promised, what God promised in the Davidic covenant, 2 Samuel chapter 7, God is still fully in line to keep everything he said. Remember, God always does with his hands what he says with his mouth. So he's going to fulfill his covenant. But otherwise, he's telling Solomon, the floodgates of judgment are going to be opened on you or your descendants, and the consequences will engulf the entire nation and lead to exile. Wow. I mean, that is pretty amazing when he starts out with this kind of wisdom, and now he comes to the end of life, And basically, God says, the word that you need to be remembering here, Solomon, is judgment. So, as we keep reading about these final, very final days of Solomon, and then leading on down from there through the years, this is what these charts are going to show us here, how this is actually going to be fulfilled. So, let's note some short-term consequences that are going to prepare the way. I mean, if God said, down the road here that you're going to go into exile and the temple is also going to be destroyed, etc., Solomon had no idea. Is that going to be after 2 more of my generations? Is that going to be 100 years? Is that going to be 800 years? I mean, he had no idea how long it was. He simply knew that's what God said was going to happen. So, I think to kind of show him, like we've said before, many times when God makes these promises, he gives a short-term fulfillment so that somebody doesn't say, oh yeah, God's just saying something, that sounds impossible, how could that ever be pulled off? God gives a short-term fulfillment, either to encourage the person if it's a blessed thing, just like last week when we talked about Solomon's wisdom, God gave him an immediate short-term indication of the wisdom he would have so that we could then trace it all the way through. And so now God is going to give him some short-term reminders or fulfillments of judgment which is going to come. In other words, bad things that are going to come. So, if you look way over on the far side, and this is going back to the first column there, 1 Kings 9 column, the immediate act to prove long. In other words, didn't have room to put it there, but immediate act to prove the long-term fulfillment would come. So how did God immediately work in Solomon's life toward the very end to show him, when I say judgment is coming, that's exactly what I mean? Well, I summarized it here with the fact that the Lord stirred up adversaries. So in chapter 11 and verse 14, we read, and the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon, Hadad the Edomite, and he was of the king's seed in Edom. So God literally stirred up this individual. And it's interesting, the Hebrew word for adversary is the same Hebrew word as, you tell me what it comes over into English, Satan. Satan, yeah. So God stirred up a Satan to oppose Solomon. And now you say, oh, well, who is this guy Hadad the Edomite? Well, remember where the Edomites are. And when you hear the word Edomite, or when you're studying Edom in the Bible, what should probably immediately click with you? Aha! There have been a few generations of hatred between God's people and the Edomites. But this is not just the long-term hatred, if you will, but we're told this is especially personal because in David's days, remember now, this is Solomon right here, but David had ruled from 1010 down to 970, and in David's days, when David and his army came down here to Edom and they fought, we are told that they killed off all of the seed royal except for Hadad. So you can imagine why that guy's blood has been boiling for decades or for years. Because Solomon's father David had come down here on a blood purge. And of course, Hadad could never forget that. He said, these people, it's not just a long-standing hundreds of years Edomites versus Israelites rivalry. We're talking about a personal family thing. My own family was killed by Solomon's dad. So, that's the first adversary. Now, chapter 11, verse 23 following, God stirred up another adversary, same word, another Satan, Okay, in other words, shall we say another Satan? And it says this man was Rezon in Damascus, R-E-Z-O-N. Where is Damascus? Syria. Okay, so we have Syria up here. So, do you see an important thing by why it's important to know map study? Here is Solomon's kingdom right here. And now he has an adversary on his southern flank. He has an adversary on his northern flank. And if that's all it would be, you might say, well, he can maybe, it'd be okay. Interestingly enough, we find a third adversary, and this is in 1126 following. And Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephrathite of Zerida, Solomon's servant, etc., lifted up his hand against the king. Okay, now this one is really interesting because we have Jeroboam is going to be, shall we say, the biggest pain. I mean, not merely does Solomon have a pain down here and a pain up here, now he's got a pain right from in here, and this man Jeroboam was a native of up in here, the northern part of Israel. Okay? And so what happened? Well, this is really interesting because originally Jeroboam had been an employee of Solomon. And he had been a good employee, a diligent employee. In fact, he worked so hard, Solomon promoted him. Say, whoa, so how in the world did they all of a sudden become at loggerheads here? How in the world did they start to oppose each other? Well, notice what the text says, and you can look on the chart there. Now, this is on the second one again, beside the 1 Kings 11, where it says, who is the prophet? This is the second column in. The prophet who prophesied. This is Ahijah. So the prophet Ahijah in 1129 following met Jeroboam one day when Jeroboam was going home from work. Probably tired, sweaty. His mind was probably on anything other than politics. And Ahijah the prophet met him, and Ahijah simply took a cloak. He tore it into 12 pieces. He counted out 10 of them, and he gave the 10 to Jeroboam, and he said, Jeroboam, God has said you are going to rule over 10 tribes. This is the interpretation he's telling him. God is going to give you the 10 northern tribes to rule over, and to David's family line, he's only going to give 2 tribes. I mean, man, what news to receive on Friday going home from work, huh? When a prophet shows up out of nowhere when you stop to get a Coke at the local convenience store, and this prophet gives this news that's going to affect the rest of your life, if you will. Okay? So, but there are 2 important things to notice here as well. Ahijah gave 2 theological points, if you will, or rationale, and you can see these on your sheet. The Davidic line in Jerusalem will continue because God chose them and his word can be trusted. So while Ahijah is telling Jeroboam this, he's saying, however, you're not getting everything because I promised there would be a Davidic ruler. And then secondly, the division of the kingdom is God's judgment on Solomon's sin or idolatry. In other words, he's in effect saying, I'm not giving this to you because you have been a good employee, and this is kind of like, your bonus check for the year. No. But he's saying, you are going to get 10 of these tribes. So you can imagine how news of what the prophet said spread. And so Jeroboam said, I've got to get out of here. I'm going to be killed. So he fled to Egypt. So at that time, Jeroboam, who had been on the payroll of Solomon, said, I've got to flee down here to Egypt in what we would term today political exile. Okay? Because the king of Egypt would indeed protect him. Now, how long that exile lasted, we really don't know. But the very next thing in the text, after we read this happening, is nothing other than Solomon's death. So I have a sneaky feeling that when Jeroboam got this news from Ahijah and fled here, we're probably pretty close to 931, which was the death of Solomon. It probably wasn't very many, probably wasn't even any years. It might have been simply months that this was happening until Solomon was going to die. Okay? So, still with me? Might have contributed to Solomon's early demise. Well, he was starting to get up there in age. Yeah, but yeah, he has some problems now. So, Solomon died, okay? And his son Rehoboam took over. So that's 931. And now here in the southern kingdom, because we're going to have two kingdoms in just a second, so we'll just say, so here in the southern kingdom then is where Rehoboam is going to be reigning. So Rehoboam took the throne at the death of his father, and naturally, our question would now be, how in the world is Ahijah's prophecy going to be fulfilled? Okay? Solomon is the king. He died, so the whole schmo, the whole kingdom gets turned over to Rehoboam. But wait a minute, we can't have it that way. I thought God said he's only going to get 2 tribes, and Jeroboam is going to get 10 tribes. So how is God going to pull this one off? Yeah, I'd like to see this act, if you will. Most of us have read the story too often, so when we read this, we don't ask enough questions or whatever because we say, oh, I remember that story, and we just kind of go over it. But when you stop and think of this, if you would be a first-time reader on this, you'd be having a lot of questions. How in the world is this going to really happen? Okay? So note the column, how was this fulfilled? So if you're on the second one down, the 1 Kings 11, 9 to 13, and you move over to the third from the right side, and it says the agent to fulfill it. In other words, how did God pull this off? What agency did he use? Well, first of all, we might say Rehoboam was a real jerk, okay? And you say, well, yeah, he was a politician. We won't go there, okay? But when he went to Shechem for the coronation, now remember, Jerusalem is his home. But he must have known there was kind of something cooking that he needed to appease people in the north. So he actually went north up here to Shechem for his coronation. And when he went there, naturally, the people who are going to be his subjects, they came to him and they said, well, what is going to be your platform to run the country? Are you going to continue like your dad? In other words, pretty burdensome on us? Or are you going to lighten the load? And notice this, if you lighten the load, we will serve you. That's a key word. Don't miss it. We will serve you. Well, I mean, it's always good to know what a politician's platform is, right? It's always good to know if you vote for him, this is what he says he's going to do when he gets in office. And so that was a good question. So Rehoboam went to the, shall we say, the older cabinet members, the ones who served with his dad, the ones who had political expertise to them. They sat around hearing his dad's wisdom for all those years. And he said, hey, what should my political platform be? What should I do? Should I be a servant to these people or should I be burdensome? And they said, man, you're asking a non-question, if you will. Of course you should be a servant to them. And then they said, they will serve you. Rehoboam didn't like that answer, okay? So Rehoboam went to his young cohorts, if you will, the people he went through the Ivy League college with who have no sense but all the so-called money and prestige behind them. I'm reading between the lines there, so it's not even in between, it's not in the text. But he went to these young whippersnappers and he said, hey, what do you guys say? Young globalists, environmentalists, you name it. And they told him, will you go back to the people and say, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you thought Dad was burdensome to you, wait until you see my political platform put into place. So he went back after 3 days like he promised, and he told the people, I am going to be a burden to you. If you thought my dad was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Well, the people said, to your tents, O northerners. We don't have any stock in the tribe of David. That's all down here in the south. And so they just broke away. And now all of a sudden are you beginning to see how Ahijah's prophecy is fulfilled. But notice in that column, because this is what to me is just fascinating. The agent to fulfill it is, number one, Rehoboam's stupidity. Nobody was holding Rehoboam at gunpoint saying, do this or else. He did it because he was just a proud, egocentric jerk. Number two, it happened because the people rebelled. They said, we're not going to put up with a ruler like that. But now read the next one, 1 Kings 12 and verse 15. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people. In other words, he gave the dumb answer he did. For the cause was from the Lord, in order that the Lord might perform his saying, which he spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Explain that to me in one sentence, in 10 seconds or less. There you go. Good job, Nate. All right, you read the note ahead of time, huh? God is sovereign, man is responsible, and how the two sometimes meet, it's hard to know. You just can't explain it. Because you say, well, what if Rehoboam wouldn't have been stupid? How would have God been able to pull this off? No. Yeah, he would have found another way, but it's like, this is amazing. Man did exactly what he wanted to do, and shall we say, he played right into the hands of God for God to fulfill what God had said, I'm going to do. And so, with that we have, and I put this quote on your sheet, God's word through Ahijah would come true. Nothing occurs because of chance. There is no chance. God is sovereign still. Rehoboam's decision is his own. The text maintains the tension between God's sovereignty and human responsibility that pervades all of Scripture. Wow. Now, there is also a long-term fulfillment from what God had promised in 1 Kings 9, 1-9. In other words, the very first line. What had God said? If Solomon turns away from me and disobeys my commands, then I will send you into exile and the temple will be destroyed. Was that prophecy ever fulfilled? It was. Yeah. So if you look on that top line under the third column, fulfillment reference, 2 Kings 24 and 2 Kings 25 tell us how all this happened. If you go over to the seventh column, how long was it between the prophecy and that fulfillment? About 350 years. Because God was giving that prophecy in around 931 or so. And it never came about until 605, 597, and 586 BC. So, I mean, wow. God perfectly did exactly what He said. And when you look at the sixth column there, who was the agent to fulfill that long-term prophecy? None other than Babylon. And remember, when the prophecy was given back here, Babylon was a no-show, shall we say, on the world scene. It's not like Babylon was the major world power, and you say, well, if anything bad is going to happen to Israel, it'll probably be because of Babylon. They're the strong man on the block. No. They weren't even the ones who was the scourge of the ancient Near East at that time. So again, this is just amazing how God is at work in and through history to the accomplishment of His purposes and to show us how He keeps His word. Okay, now as the story continues in Kings, there's still a lot of intertwining of kings and events and prophecies and fulfillments. So let's now move to Jeroboam, because when Rehoboam told the people that he was going to have a heavy hand, that's when the people said, okay, go to your own tents, people. And when some of them said, But who in the world would we ever have to be our first king of the north? Somebody said, hey, don't you remember Jeroboam? He's a northerner. He's a native son. He had to flee from Solomon, flee from the Davidic line. He'd be a great one to take over. Oh yeah, somebody said, don't you remember that prophecy that said he's going to get 10 of the tribes? Of course Jeroboam's going to be our king up here. So this is where we have the split in the kingdoms. And now from this point on, 931 on, we're going to have the southern kingdom down here. We're going to have the northern kingdom up here. The southern kingdom, of course, has the Davidic ruler, always a descendant of David, as God is going to fulfill His promises. And up here in the north, as we're going to see as we keep walking through these, they're going to be about 5 dynasties, if you want to call them that. Some of them are very short-lived, but it will be like 5 or 6 different ruling families. And every one of the kings here in the north is going to be bad news spiritually. So, let's start now with prophecy concerning Jeroboam, 1 Kings 11:38, where we read, and this is what Ahijah had told him earlier, even before he became king. Ahijah said, and it shall be, if thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and will walk in my ways and do what's right in my sight to keep my statutes and commandments, as David my servant did. Now this is amazing. God said, I will be with thee and build thee a sure house as I built for David, and will give Israel unto thee. Wow. And it's because we know how the story's going to play out. But you say, what an incredible promise. God told this guy, I will build you a sure house the same way I built David a sure house. You will always have one of your descendants on the throne up here in the north if you will just follow in the ways of David and obey the commands of God and not turn aside. That is incredible. But on roughly the first day of when he, after all the parties were over and the inaugural celebration, if you will, for Jeroboam, on roughly the first day, we realize, well, so much for that if promise, because everything headed south. Well, no, it didn't head south. He's running in the north. Everything, the bottom dropped out of his bucket, shall we say. So he laid out his major agenda, and if you turn to 1 Kings 12:26 following, we see what that major agenda for him really was. And by the way, this is going to, shall we say, his poison, the poison from Jeroboam, is going to permeate the entire northern kingdom for the rest of their history until, when we get down here to 722 BC, is when Assyria is going to come in and take them. But Jeroboam was so bad that he influenced all the rest of the northern kings. And so you're familiar, and I gave you some references there you can check out, where it says, King so-and-so walked in the way of Jeroboam and in his sin which he made Israel to sin. So when Jeroboam started to set up his kingdom here, he began to say, okay, if I am here in the north, and shall we draw our Mason-Dixon line here so we realize it? So here's the southern kingdom down here, northern kingdom up here. He said, okay, if I'm going to be reigning in the north, what do I need to do to assure myself that people will not pretty soon maybe renege on me and say, wait a minute, we just love Jerusalem. We just love, and we have some relatives down there. I think we're going to go down there. And he said, I've got to do something, in effect, to tell people you never, ever have to cross the Mason-Dixon line. You can stay north of it, and you can always effectively and faithfully worship God. And so, in effect, he's saying, I've got to have some kind of close replica to what people in the South believed. It can't be too radical a transition to start, or some people might say, for sure, he's leading us astray. But we've got to just blur things a little bit so that they think it's in effect the same thing, just shall we say, an upgrade for us northerners. Okay? 1 Kings 12:26 following. Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, the heart of this people will turn again unto their Lord, unto Rehoboam king of Judah. They'll kill me, and they'll go to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, said unto them, it's too much for you people to go to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Notice how he's tying their past history to this. And he set the one in Bethel, the other he put in Dan, and this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one even in Dan. He made a house of high places, made priests of the lowest of the people who were not of the sons of Levi. He ordained a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month. Just like the feast that's in Judah, he offered on the altar. He did the same at Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he made. He placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel, the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel, and offered upon the altar and burnt incense. 4 key platforms, 4 key things that he did here. Notice. First of all, as you see on your sheet, a sacred site. People were used to having a special place to go for their special worship in Jerusalem. But he said, I can't let them go there. So he set up a house of high places, in other words, temples, worship centers, at Dan and Bethel. Where is Dan on the map? Geography, super important. Way up north toward the northern boundary. Okay, Dan. Where is Bethel? Way down here, just a couple of miles north of Jerusalem. But it's at the southern part of the boundary. Do you see what he's doing here? He's telling the people, it doesn't matter where you live in the kingdom, you're always close to a worship center. You live here, it's only 14 kilometers to Bethel. You live here, it's only 17 kilometers to Dan. So you don't need to go to Jerusalem. You've got it made, people. And this guy is a smart politician. I mean, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? Okay. Humanly speaking, he's a smart politician who has it figured out that we need to have these worship centers close to where the people are. So as I put on your sheet, a major feature of the temple cult, and by cult here, don't think of cult as we use the term for something that is totally contrary to Christianity. It's referring to religion. A major feature of the Jerusalem temple worship was the celebration of Yahweh's eternal covenant with David. Jeroboam could not have his people participating in a cult that declared all rules save Davidic illegitimate. So both to protect himself and to provide his state with proper religious undergirding, he set up 2 official shrines at opposite ends of the realm, Bethel and Dan. Number 2, second part of the platform, sacred objects or symbols. 2 golden calves. And he identified them with the gods that brought them out of Egypt. Now, there is a significant question here that we're not exactly sure how to answer. How are we to interpret the 2 golden calves? So I put on your sheet probably the 2 best alternatives. Some Old Testament theologians, etc., say they were actually images of Yahweh or idols. I really don't think they were. That would have been too drastic for these people when they, even though they weren't all that careful in obeying the 10 Commandments, but they knew they weren't supposed to have idols. So I don't really think that they looked at those calves and thought, this is an idol. This idol is my deity. Probably better to say they were pedestals upon which the invisible Yahweh was conceived as standing or enthroned. Because in Egypt, when the Egyptians, they had their bull god and all that, they really didn't think their god or goddess was a bull or a cow. But in other words, that represented the power of that deity. And in effect, if you will, it was like their deity was standing on the back of that bull. And so it could be easy for these people having, Egypt in the background, even though none of these people had lived there, but just, from hearing stories, etc., to think, well, yeah, that makes sense. Our God is a strong God, and it's hard to worship in something that's invisible, so we can worship this image, if you will, because it's a representation of our God who's standing on top of it. But again, however you're going to look at it, but it could be somewhat equivalent of the cherubim in the temple. Because remember, if you went to Jerusalem, a worshiper, you wouldn't be able to see the cherubim because they were in the most holy place. But you did have a symbol representing the place of God's localized presence. Because remember, in the Holy of Holies, you had the two cherubim right over the Ark of the Covenant. If this is the Ark, you had one cherub standing like this, and the other cherub was standing over here like this, and they were touching their wings right here in the middle. So it'd be really easy to start, if you're playing some mind games, to get these people to say, yeah, this makes sense. Number 3, we have sacred workers, non-Levite priests. Okay? Now, this would be really popular with the people because, remember, throughout their history, there were times when they said, the priesthood is too restrictive. You're too exclusive to say you've got to be a Levite of a certain family to be the priest. We're all spiritual. In fact, I even know priests that aren't as spiritual as I am, so you're telling me I can't be a priest? So now Jeroboam opens the floodgates and says, do you want to be a priest? Sign up is open the next 48 hours. Go to highpriest.com and you can sign up online even. It says that in the text if you read it carefully, okay. You get the point, though, how this is so appealing? Because remember, go back earlier in their history to stories where they rebelled. People rebelled when they said it's not fair that only Levites are priests. And God killed hundreds of people in such rebellions. But always remember this. Who made the priesthood exclusive? God. It wasn't Aaron. So it was rebellion against God when they say, we don't like the way God set up the show. Okay. Number 4, sacred calendar. Remember how during the time of Moses, God had established a sacred calendar? I mean, it wasn't just a paid holiday when you say, hey, friends of mine, come on over, we're going to grill in the backyard and then play volleyball if it doesn't rain. That's not why Israel had a sacred calendar. It was all about their history. It was all about their theology. It was all about agricultural times of the year where God was trying to teach them valuable lessons. So Jeroboam, in his wisdom, said, we've also got to have some key religious festivals. Our calendar has to have these holidays on it, or I could lose people to the south. And so, as it says, specifically naming one of them, he set it up on the 8th month and the 15th day. Ooh, pretty tricky. That was a month later than a really famous or a really important Israelite holidays. Remember, the 7th month, the first day of the month was the beginning of the new year. Okay? The 10th day of the month was the most important calendar day in Israel's history because it celebrated Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. The 15th to the 21st day of the month was very significant. What festival? No. Tabernacles or ingathering. Under the name Tabernacles, they celebrated their 40 years in the wilderness when they lived in tents and how God provided for all their needs. And it went under the name ingathering because that was the end of their agricultural year. It was the equivalent, really, of our Thanksgiving. So they were celebrating God's faithfulness through another year of agriculture. So what did he say here? He said, I'm going to devise this, as it says, out of my own heart, and we're going to have our big shindig on the 8th month and the 15th day. So you don't need to worry about going to Jerusalem for these other things. We've got our act together here in the north. You never, ever have to go below the Mason-Dixon line. Wow. So, again, I put a few quotes on your sheet there that you can see. But I mean, notice he's covering all of the bases as he begins, if you will, a new state religion to make sure he stays in power And all he's doing is, shall we say, tweaking religion, what appears to be a little bit, but in reality there is no such thing as tweaking religion a little bit, because it automatically becomes another religion. It becomes error. So, the quote on your sheet, these acts of Jeroboam constituted a serious offense in the sight of God. They were in direct violation of the Mosaic covenant, and they introduced a potential syncretism of true worship with the fertility called of Baal. So in reality, what we have now, people who are living in the north now have options. Are you going to remain faithful to the genuine religion, the worship of Yahweh the Lord? Or are you going to follow Jeroboamism in his religion? And it's only going to be a few years later where a third option is going to be added to this smorgasbord, and that's with Ahab and Jezebel, Baalism, where she's going to try and make that the official religion of the northern kingdom. So you can imagine how messed up these people are here spiritually. Am I going to stand for the true God? And if I do, am I going to put up with all this paraphernalia of Jeroboam? Or do I want to just sell out to the local yokels and be a Canaanite and say, Yahweh, who's that? No, I'm one with you, man. I'm part and parcel of your way of looking at things. So, yeah, obviously, and as the time went on here, the worse and worse it got, and that's why 722 came.
So I'm kind of curious, because what the Northern Kingdom did, it would seem that almost to man that God would ignore them. Yet, two of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament are specifically to the Northern Kingdom. It seems counterintuitive that God did this and Jeroboam did his thing, that God would still send, not to the Southern Kingdom, but to the Northern Kingdom with Elijah and Elisha.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like, why did God send his two greatest prophets
There.
instead
Mm-hmm.
of the Southern Kingdom?
I'll tell you why. Why are you laughing? Why are you laughing, Angela? What's the answer? What? What kind of God do we serve? I think I say we have the answer, but I think this is legitimate. No, there you go. Because God is so long suffering. And remember, you've got to pronounce it that way because that's what the Hebrew says. God has a long nose. It takes God a long time before he gets angry. And then you can add another word to it, is simply, or words, mercy and grace. And I say that not because I stayed up last night knowing you were going to ask me and I had to come up with an answer. I say it because as you read the Old Testament, as you keep going here, God keeps telling them, I sent my prophets to you night and day, continually, because I am long-suffering, gracious, and merciful. I don't want to judge you. I want you to turn. I want you to follow the truth. But when you come to the end, 2 Kings 17 with the northern kingdom, 2 Kings 25 with the southern kingdom, eventually in 586, God is going to remind them, I sent my prophets to you, and he in effect said, I'm pulling out my hair because what else can I do? A prophet was a spokesman for deity, and if you don't listen to God's voice to you, well, what else can I do to be nice to you? And that's why, don't get me started on this, Bob, and we need to conclude here. That's why I get very upset with people who say, oh, the God of the Old Testament is a vindictive bully. There's no grace to him. We need Jesus who's lovey-dovey. Like I said, don't get me started on that, but it's not that way. The God of the Old Testament is the God of the New, and the God of the Old Testament is just as long-suffering and gracious and merciful as the Jesus of the New. Phil?
This was a question from about 5 minutes ago, but didn't a lot of the Levites from the north get
Yeah, there were times then when Levites who were up here and were godly individuals, they said, wait a minute, we're not going to put up with this. So they did go down here. That's good. Yeah, glad you pointed that. Yeah, you read it somewhere. It's in the Bible, Phil. Yeah. Okay, we need to bring this to conclusion. This is powerful stuff when we think of application for our lives, okay? So as you see, first of all, points to ponder, let's say with Solomon. We learn here as we think about this slippery slope or this slippery slide into sin, where somebody will tolerate something or just allow it and say, well, I wouldn't do that myself, but who am I to say so-and-so can't do that? That's beginning the slippery slope, okay? Secondly, observance or participation. Before you know it, that person will begin to participate in that kind of stuff. Before you know it, there is a comfortable syncretism. Like, well, there's really not much difference between those two things, Royce. They mix together. When you put them together in this recipe, it tastes so good. And then before you know it, you've totally forsaken God. You've totally turned away from God. And in the case of Solomon, it led into polytheism, where he literally was worshiping false gods. So as I put that on your sheet, consider this slide, how it's so evident today with us in the way we get duped into temptation. Think of Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 11, where we read about putting on the spiritual armor, and it tells us that Satan himself has a lot of different methods that he uses, a lot of different schemes, a lot of different devices to trip us up. The devil has a battle plan for every one of us, and that battle plan is not the same, because he knows what trips me up, you might have no problem with, and what you get tripped up by, I have no problem with. But he knows certain things, and he's going to work to trip us up. And so I gave you here just a couple of things from this Puritan writer, a book called Precious Remedies Against Satan's Devices. And for lack of time here, you can go ahead and you can read what those are, but it's a reminder just how tricky Satan is in getting us to believe a lie and start down this slippery slope. And then lessons from Jeroboam. You cannot tweak theology for each new generation. I like this quote I gave you here. The basic problem with accommodationist theologies, that is, with a theology that tries to accommodate different things, that tries to restructure and reduce Orthodox Christianity to dimensions presumably acceptable to the modern mind, is that the modern mind is notoriously changeable. Now, I love this sentence. A theology married to the modernity of one decade can be widowed in the next. If you try and adapt your theology to the current environment, the next generation is going to laugh at you like, hey, you're pretty doofus. Why would you believe that? This is really the way we worship God. Or, as I like to say in reference to this quote, today's sacred cow is tomorrow's fertilizer. And you can use a different word for fertilizer if you prefer. That's right. You don't tweak it. You don't tweak what God has said. And so just think of the modern slides and tweaks that happen today. The denial of, and I put in quotes, genuine scientific biology. Remember what unbelievers say? Well, follow the science. You can't believe the Bible. When it comes to real biology, they don't want to follow it, and so it's transgender, it's LGBTQ plus, etc., etc. And then how do they respond if you don't believe them? Well, if you're not going to support it, would you rather have a dead child? I don't know how many stories I have read, literal stories, where children have had all these sex operations when they're 12, 13, 14, because a counselor told their parents, well, your child is such that if you don't submit to it, they will commit suicide. Well, I want my child to be alive even if they believe this baloney. I know, yeah. But that's what the world will tell you. Well, do you want a live child, or are you going to take a hardline stance? Female pastors. Only a misogynistic, chauvinistic individual would be so hateful and exclusive. Women are as smart as men. Why aren't they pastors? You just hate women. That's your problem, Short. Really? Or people say, well, hey, if we're going to, we need to have more people come to our church, and young people are dropping out, so we've got to accommodate them, and we've got to do whatever they want, because just think, they're the future of this church. Yeah. The world has really tricky ways of getting us on the slide, and then, you know what a slippery slide is like? I'll close with this illustration quickly. When I was a boy, city parks had slippery slides that actually, whatever the stuff on them was slippery, and you didn't have lawyers who were there looking for cases to whatever. So if you get on those slippery slides, I remember doing this in Archibald, Ohio. You get on top and you look down, and as a little boy it seems a long way down, but I mean you get on and it is fast. And we used to actually take wax paper and sit on it to ensure that our speed would double. And sometimes we would say, okay, halfway down, I'm looking at this point, and when I get there, I'm going to grab the sides and I'm going to stop on a dime. Yeah, crazy, crazy. You never stopped anywhere on that slippery slide. And that's exactly the way it is when the devil tries to test us. It's, well, you can stop this anytime you want. No, you can't. You start down the slide, and it's going to be fast. Okay, should be Fellowship Sunday, I think, so enjoy the drinks, desserts, whatever, and enjoy the fellowship while you're doing it.